In 1347, a ship docked in Sicily carrying sailors covered in black boils. Within 5 years, a third of Europe was dead. Historians call it the Black Death. What they rarely mention is that certain communities, particularly in the Middle East, had dramatically lower mortality rates. And researchers tracing those patterns keep landing on the same thing. The plants those communities used daily, in their food, in their water, in their rituals. This is not coincidence. And it is not ancient superstition. 10 plants appear throughout the oldest texts in human history. Most people recognize their names from church, from Christmas, from Sunday school. Almost nobody knows what they actually do, because somewhere between the ancient world and the modern one, the knowledge got buried, mistranslated, dismissed, forgotten. Modern science is digging it back up. And what it's finding is making pharmacologists genuinely uncomfortable. The first plant on this list has been hiding in plain sight for centuries, and most of the Western world has been using the wrong one. The biblical hyssop appears across scripture as the purification herb. Ancient priests bundled it, dipped it in water, and used it to cleanse the sick, the dying, and sacred spaces. For hundreds of years, scholars assumed it referred to a blue-flowered European herb called Hyssopus officinalis. It's what ended up in Western herbal traditions. It's what sits in some apothecaries today. There's one problem. That plant doesn't grow anywhere near the ancient Near East. It never did. The real biblical hyssop, confirmed now by botanists and archaeologists, is Syrian oregano, and the gap between the two plants isn't minor. Syrian oregano produces something the European substitute barely contains at all, 2 compounds that physically tear through bacterial cell walls. Scientists are currently testing them against infections that hospitals can no longer treat with standard antibiotics. Ancient priests weren't waving herbs around for ceremony. They were sanitizing with one of the most effective natural antimicrobials their world had ever produced. And a translation error quietly erased that knowledge for centuries. If that's what the first plant on this list turns out to be, you need to hear what the second one is. The Balm of Gilead. Here's what the ancient world knew about it. Caravans crossed hundreds of miles of open desert to carry it. Wars were fought, actual military campaigns over control of the valleys where the trees that produced it grew. A single shipment of this resin was enough to make a merchant wealthy for life. The Roman general Pompey seized an entire Balm of Gilead orchard as a war trophy. Not gold, not land, an orchard. Because the resin that dripped from those trees healed wounds in ways that nothing else available at the time could match. Soldiers who received it survived injuries that killed others. It wasn't legend, it was battlefield medicine. The tree, Commiphora gileadensis, grows only in specific conditions. It thrives in the extreme heat of the Jordan Valley in ways it simply won't replicate elsewhere. Ancient cultivators guarded their groves like classified technology because that's essentially what it was. Modern researchers analyzing the resin have found compounds that create a physical barrier over damaged tissue while simultaneously suppressing the inflammatory response that slows healing. Dermatologists are now studying it as a natural alternative for wounds that fail to close under conventional treatment. Pompey wasn't being irrational. He understood exactly what he was taking. If you grow things, cook with herbs, or care about what goes into your body, this channel is going to keep giving you this kind of content. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming. Now here is a plant that ancient texts called the cure for everything except death. That phrase sounds like exaggeration. It isn't. Black Cumin, Nigella sativa, appears in early biblical texts under the name fitches. The seeds are small and dark and slightly bitter, and cultures across the Middle East, India, and the Mediterranean use them for over 2,000 years across an almost impossibly wide range of conditions. Respiratory problems, digestive disorders, infections, inflammation, metabolic disease, the cure for everything. Claim came not from one culture, but from dozens of independent traditions that had never spoken to each other, all landing on the same plant. So, modern pharmacology tested it. The primary compound, thymoquinone, works through multiple pathways simultaneously. It reduces inflammatory signaling, it improves how the body processes fats and sugars, it supports liver function, it modulates the immune system, which means it can quiet an immune response that's gone too far or support one that isn't doing enough. That multi-pathway action is actually what made researchers take it seriously. Most pharmaceutical drugs target one thing. Thymoquinone targets several at once, which is exactly what ancient observers described, not a remedy for one condition, a remedy that seemed to help with many. The US supplement market for black cumin oil has expanded into a distinct commercial category now tracked by multiple financial analysts. The people buying it aren't fringe consumers. They're people who read the clinical trials. 2,000 years of reputation. And the trials are holding it up. But if black cumin surprises you, the next plant is going to stop you completely. Because this one cost a year's wages for a single jar. And neuroscientists are now using it to challenge the entire antidepressant industry. Nard. In the Gospel of John, a woman breaks open a jar of spikenard oil and pours it over Jesus. The disciples don't react with reverence, they react with outrage. Because what she just poured out represented 12 months of income for an ordinary laborer. To understand that reaction, you need to understand where spikenard comes from. The plant, Nardostachys jatamansi, grows only in a narrow band of the Himalayan mountains above 10,000 feet in conditions almost nothing else can survive. Harvesting it required getting to those elevations, which in the ancient world meant months of travel through some of the most dangerous terrain on Earth. Then it had to come back, overland, through Central Asia, across desert trade routes, before it ever reached Jerusalem. Every jar represented a journey that killed people, which makes what neuroscientists found inside it even more striking. The compounds extracted from spikenard's root interact directly with the brain's calming system, the same system that pharmaceutical anti-anxiety medications target. Studies are investigating its effects on sleep, on anxiety, and specifically on the protection of brain cells from the kind of oxidative damage linked to cognitive decline and neurodegenerative disease. Ancient people who couldn't possibly have understood neurotransmitter systems selected this plant at extraordinary cost and effort for its effect on the mind and emotions. They described it as calming, restoring, something that touched a part of a person that other remedies couldn't reach. Modern neuroscience looked at the molecular structure and found out they were right. And we are only 4 plants in. The next one has a myth so famous that most people assume the real story must be boring by comparison. They are completely wrong, because the truth behind this plant, what it actually contains, what it actually does, and what modern emergency medicine is still using it for today, is more startling than anything the legend ever claimed. In ancient Rome, surgeons faced a problem that no amount of skill could solve. A patient in pain moves. A patient who moves dies on the table. And in a world without modern anesthesia, the only options were speed, restraint, or something that could put a person under completely. They found something. The mandrake root. Mandragora officinarum appears in Genesis as a fertility remedy. It appears in Roman military medical records as a surgical anesthetic. Ancient surgeons soaked sponges in mandrake preparation and held them over a patient's nose before operating. The patient lost consciousness. The surgery happened. Some of them survived. The mythology that grew around this plant, the screaming root, the human-shaped body, the supernatural danger, wasn't accidental. It was a warning system. Because the difference between a dose that sedated and a dose that killed was razor thin. Untrained people who tried to use it died. So the folklore made people afraid to touch it without knowing exactly what they were doing. The chemistry underneath the myth is extraordinary. Mandrake contains tropane alkaloids, compounds that block specific receptors in the nervous system, producing sedation, pain suppression, and at higher doses, complete unconsciousness. Ancient surgeons had discovered, through generations of terrible trial and error, how to use one of the most pharmacologically complex plant compounds in human history. Here is where the story becomes almost impossible to believe. Those same compounds are still in use today. Atropine, derived from the same alkaloid family, is on the World Health Organization's list of essential medicines. It's used in emergency cardiac care. It's used as an antidote to certain kinds of poisoning. Scopolamine is used for motion sickness and post-surgical nausea. The screaming root of ancient legend is sitting in emergency rooms right now, from surgery rooms to a single island. There is a tree that exists in only one place on Earth that produces something clinically significant. Not because nothing similar grows elsewhere, but because the specific combination of soil, humidity, and microclimate on the Greek island of Chaos creates a resin that no other location has been able to replicate. The tree is the mastic tree. The resin is mastic gum, and ancient people across the Mediterranean chewed it the way Americans chew gum today, for bad breath, for stomach pain, for digestive problems that wouldn't go away. For a long time, that sounded like folklore. Then gastroenterologists tested it. Mastic gum can eradicate Helicobacter pylori, the bacteria living in the stomach lining that causes the majority of chronic ulcers. Somewhere between 35 and 40% of Americans are carrying this bacteria right now. Most of them don't know it. Standard treatment requires 2 or 3 antibiotics taken together, and resistance to those antibiotics is rising. Mastic gum disrupts H. pylori through a different pathway entirely, one that the bacteria hasn't developed resistance to. Because it's been there for thousands of years, and the bacteria never had a chance to adapt the way it does to pharmaceutical compounds introduced in the last few decades. Ancient people on one Greek island chewed this resin for upset stomachs. They were treating active bacterial infections without knowing bacteria existed. Now here is the plant that may be the most controversial on this list. Not because the science is weak, but because of what it means if the science is right. Sweet cane. Known in Hebrew as cane bossem. Botanically identified as Acorus calamus, a semi-aquatic marsh reed that grows in wetlands across North America right now. It was one of the core ingredients in the sacred anointing oil described in the book of Exodus. That formula, myrrh, cinnamon, olive oil, and sweet cane, was legally protected under ancient Israelite law. Unauthorized reproduction carried serious punishment. This was not a cooking recipe. This was a restricted formulation that an entire legal system was built around protecting. The reason becomes clearer when you look at what's inside it. The compounds in sweet cane cross the blood-brain barrier. They interact directly with the brain's calming and regulatory systems. Traditional medicine used this plant for cognitive support, for anxiety, for conditions we would now describe as neurological. Modern neuropharmacology is studying the same compounds for their potential role in reducing brain inflammation. One of the underlying mechanisms now linked to depression, cognitive decline, and certain neurological disorders. But here is the complication. At high concentrations, one of those compounds carries carcinogenic risk. The FDA has restricted sweet cane in food products in the United States specifically because of this ceiling, a plant so powerful that ancient law protected its formula. Now navigating federal regulation for the same underlying reason. The potency that made it sacred is the same potency that made regulators intervene. Most Americans know the next plant from Christmas. Very few know what's actually inside it. Frankincense, Boswellia sacra, is a resin harvested from trees growing in Somalia, Oman, and Yemen. The tree survives in conditions of extreme heat, poor soil, and almost no water. To harvest it, you slash the bark. The resin bleeds out, hardens in the open air, and falls as small amber-colored teardrops that have been traded across the ancient world for over 3,000 years. The Magi carried it to Bethlehem. Egyptian priests burned it in temples. Roman emperors imported it by the shipload. Modern pharmacology pulled it apart and found boswellic acids, compounds that block a specific enzyme driving the production of inflammatory chemicals in the body. The same inflammatory pathway linked to arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, and certain tumor environments. Clinical trials are now testing standardized frankincense extract as a support therapy alongside conventional cancer treatment. The research is early, but the signal is strong enough that oncologists are paying attention. There is, however, a shadow over this story. The boswellia tree is disappearing. Global demand for frankincense, driven partly by the wellness industry, partly by religious use, has triggered overharvesting on a scale the trees cannot recover from. Some wild populations in Somalia and Ethiopia are declining faster than they can reproduce. The IUCN has flagged multiple boswellia species as near threatened. The same world rediscovering this ancient medicine may be destroying the source of it. That tension has no easy resolution. But frankincense never traveled alone. In almost every ancient account where frankincense appears, the Magi, the temple incense, the burial of the dead, there is a second resin beside it. Darker, more bitter, built for a completely different purpose. Myrrh. Commiphora myrrha bleeds from a thorny African shrub when its bark is cut. And while frankincense was associated with the sacred, myrrh was associated with something more immediate, the human body in crisis. It prepared the dead. It treated open wounds. Nicodemus brought it to the tomb of Jesus. Roman soldiers offered it mixed with wine to men being crucified. This was not ceremony. This was emergency medicine. The compounds inside myrrh stimulate blood flow to damaged tissue, accelerate white blood cell recruitment, and suppress wound infection. But researchers found something unexpected. Certain myrrh compounds interact with the body's pain receptors, not at pharmaceutical strength, but enough to explain why ancient surgeons reached for it in their most serious cases and why Roman soldiers carried it to execution sites. Today, myrrh sits in essential oil blends, church ceremonies, and aromatherapy products across the United States. Most people using it have no idea they're holding something that appeared at some of the most documented moments in human history, and that it kept appearing there because it worked. And then there is saffron. Gram for gram, it costs more than gold. It takes roughly 150,000 hand-harvested flowers to produce a single pound. Every flower must be picked by hand. The 3 red threads inside each flower must be removed by hand. Dry them wrong, store them wrong, and the chemistry collapses. The ancient world used saffron as a luxury spice, a textile dye, and a medicine. It appears in the Song of Solomon alongside royalty and rare perfumes. Persian kings bathed in saffron-infused water. Cleopatra reportedly used it before meetings to enhance her mental clarity. Modern neuroscientists looked at those historical accounts and ran clinical trials. What they found was not what anyone expected. The active compounds in saffron, particularly one called saffronal, inhibit the reuptake of serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine in the brain. Those are the exact 3 neurotransmitters targeted by the most widely prescribed antidepressant medications in the United States. Multiple randomized controlled trials have now compared standardized saffron extract directly against fluoxetine, the generic name for Prozac. Head-to-head. Same dosing period. Same patient population. The outcomes have been close enough that psychiatrists are discussing it in clinical literature. Saffron has also shown measurable effects on premenstrual syndrome and early-stage Alzheimer's symptoms, both conditions involving the same neurotransmitter systems. Ancient cultures spent enormous resources acquiring a spice they described as elevating the spirit and clearing the mind. They were observing a real pharmacological effect. They just had no framework to explain the mechanism. The mechanism is now on paper, 10 plants. Thousands of years between their first recorded use and their current clinical trials, and running through every single one of them, the same pattern. These weren't random selections. Ancient cultures chose these plants through generations of direct, careful observation. They watched what happened. They refined the applications. They protected the formulas. They paid extraordinary prices to acquire the ones that grew far away. And they passed the knowledge forward in the most durable format available to them. Sacred text. What modern pharmacology is doing now is not discovering these plants. It is catching up to them. Syrian oregano against antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Mandrake alkaloids in emergency cardiac care. Black cumin working through inflammatory pathways that pharmaceutical compounds try to hit one at a time. Saffron matching antidepressants in controlled trials. Frankincense interrupting the inflammatory cascade linked to arthritis and cancer research. Mastic gum eliminating the stomach bacteria that a third of the country is carrying right now without knowing it. The ancient world got there first. And the honest question, the one that's hard to shake after looking at all of this, is what else got lost? What other knowledge was written down, mistranslated, dismissed as superstition, or simply forgotten when the trade routes collapsed and the ancient pharmacies closed? Because if 10 plants pulled from 2,000-year-old texts can hold up this well under modern scrutiny, the answer is probably quite a lot more than we've found yet. If this changed how you think about what ancient knowledge actually was, hit the like button. It helps more people find this kind of content. Drop a comment telling me which plant surprised you most. I want to know if the Mandrake emergency room connection landed the way I think it did. And if you want to keep going deeper into history that holds up under science, subscribe. There is a lot more waiting.